Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. March 19th, 2016, 8:21 a.m. Surveillance footage captures 16-year-old Paige Doherty, neatly groomed, backpack over her shoulders, pushing open the glass door of a small store on a busy street in Clydebank. She steps inside. The door slowly shuts behind her, and that's the last time anyone sees her. It was a typical Saturday morning. No panic, no unusual activity. But from that moment, a story began. One that would send shockwaves through not only her family and friends, but the entire community. A story where the familiar turned into something chilling. A cozy local store, a friendly owner, a street everyone knew, became a doorway into darkness. Within hours, Paige's family started to realize that something wasn't right. Paige Doherty was born on April 17, 2000, in the Scottish town of Clydebank. From an early age, she stood out for her kind heart and unusual maturity. Smiling, thoughtful, and approachable, she got along easily with people of all ages. Paige wasn't one to seek attention, but her presence was always felt. She was the oldest of four, and her sense of responsibility came naturally, especially when it came to her siblings. Her mother, Pamela, raised the family with her husband, Andy, Paige's stepfather. Their home was always full of life. While they faced their share of struggles, there was a deep bond between everyone, genuine care and closeness. Paige had a special place in her heart for her younger brother and sisters. She didn't just look after them, she truly cared. From a young age, she helped out around the house and wasn't afraid to speak up when serious matters came up. She was especially close to her younger brother Andrew, who had developmental needs. Paige often took him to the park or the movies. These moments weren't just important to him, they meant a lot to her too. From early on, Paige knew what she wanted to do with her life. She dreamed of becoming a hairstylist and beauty expert. She was always drawn to the world of fashion and personal style. She loved doing makeup and hair, experimenting with looks, and staying up to date with trends. By 16, she was focused and clear on her goals. When she got the chance to work Saturdays at a local salon, she took it seriously. It wasn't just a side job. It was the beginning of her future. Her co-workers described her as punctual, respectful, and eager to learn. Paige also had a vibrant social life. Her social media was full of pictures with friends and cheerful clips where she laughed, joked, and showed off her beauty skills. She had lots of acquaintances, but her closest friend was Lauren. They spent a lot of time together, sleepovers, heart-to-heart talks, sharing secrets, and dreaming about the future. One more key person in Paige's life was her boyfriend, Dylan. Their relationship was young but real, filled with care and warmth. They texted often, called every day, and talked about everything. Paige trusted him. He knew what was going on in her life, and according to those who knew them, he really cared. Being apart, even for one day, was hard for both of them. Paige's life was simple, but it had real meaning. She often told those closest to her that she had big dreams, but she never planned on leaving her hometown. Her vision of success wasn't about escape. It was about building a life in the place where she grew up. Her actions reflected real purpose. She worked, studied, helped others, and showed care, not because she had to, but because it felt like the right thing to do. At first glance, John Leatham seemed like a typical member of the stable and respected middle class in the Clydebank community. At 32 years old, he was a local business owner, married, and raising a young daughter. His wife, Kasia, was originally from Poland. From the outside, their life looked quiet and comfortable. A modest home near his workplace, a steady routine, caring for their daughter, going for walks. It all gave off an image of reliability. John was well known in the neighborhood and maintained the image of a polite and composed man. He ran a small storefront called Delicious Deli, a combination of a corner store, mini cafe, and deli counter. It sat on a busy street not far from residential areas and a bus stop. Locals, students, and workers from nearby streets were frequent visitors. John often worked the counter himself, chatting with customers, many of whom he knew by face. His demeanor was friendly, he rarely showed irritation, and never outwardly acted in a disrespectful way. Those who stopped by his shop regularly didn't notice anything off. He came across as quiet, neat, maybe a little reserved, but nothing that raised concern. His business reputation was solid. The store was clean, well-stocked, and consistently open. No one had anything bad to say about him, and he wasn't linked to any drama or controversy, at least not until March 2016. But behind the image of a dependable family man, there were facts that most people didn't know. John had a twin brother named George Leatham. Their relationship wasn't widely known, and unlike John, George had a criminal past. In 2003, when he was just 19, George was convicted of a serious offense. He ambushed a woman, dragged her into the bushes, and carried out an assault with intent. He received a 3-year suspended sentence, was ordered to complete community service, and was placed on the offender registry. Years went by, but George's behavior didn't improve. In 2016, just days before a court hearing, he was involved in another incident. He showed up drunk near a gas station, armed with a knife and metal batons, and began shouting threats at passers-by. Soon after, he was back in custody. His life remained chaotic and dangerous. In 2019, he committed another assault, this time at home, targeting his pregnant wife. Under the influence, he physically attacked her, causing serious injuries. He was later sentenced to 9 months in prison. John, on the other hand, had never been charged with any crimes. His record was clean. No complaints, no police reports, nothing in the system. That allowed him to maintain a flawless public image for years. But as investigators began to unravel the current case, a very different picture began to emerge, not of a calm and reliable businessman, but of someone capable of sudden, uncontrollable aggression. The Leatham family found itself under public scrutiny, but unlike his brother George, John had managed to keep up the appearance of a normal life for a while. His wife, Cassia, never noticed anything that seemed alarming or out of place. So the image of family man and shop owner turned out to be just that, an image. The Leatham family history was complex, tangled, and unsettling, but few knew the full story. And it was this very contrast between a calm exterior and a hidden tension that ultimately led to a tragedy that shook all of Clydebank. On the evening of March 18, 2016, Paige Doherty was staying over at her best friend Lauren's house. It was a typical sleepover, something they did often. The two girls would spend those nights talking about life, sharing personal stories, trying out new makeup looks, experimenting with hairstyles. Even at her age, Paige was already very organized. She knew she had to be at work early the next morning, so she set her alarm in advance to make sure she got up in time and didn't miss her bus. The next morning, March 19th, Paige got up as planned, without any fuss. She got dressed, said goodbye to Lauren, and left to walk to the bus stop. It was her usual Saturday routine. She started walking the familiar route. Normally, she would stop at the same store each time. Its owner, Ashi Ahmed, had known Paige since she was little. She often popped in to grab a sandwich or a drink before work. But that day, something changed. As she passed Ashi's shop, she simply waved at him without going inside, and kept walking down the street. Just a few yards from that usual spot stood John Letham's store. That morning, Paige chose to stop there instead. At exactly 8:21 a.m., surveillance cameras recorded Paige approaching the deli and stepping inside. That was the last time anyone saw her. From that moment, she completely disappeared from everyone's view. When Paige didn't show up at the salon for her shift, alarm bells rang immediately. Her co-workers knew she took her responsibility seriously. She never ran late or missed a shift without notice. Her phone was turned off. The team at the salon tried calling her but couldn't get through. They contacted her mother, Pamela, to let her know. Worry quickly turned into fear. Pamela couldn't reach her either, which was completely out of character. Paige always replied to texts and calls, especially from those closest to her. At the same time, her boyfriend Dylan was also trying to reach her. None of his messages had been read. Growing increasingly concerned, he called the salon to check if she'd arrived. When he found out that Paige hadn't shown up and no one had heard from her, his concern turned into panic. Dylan and Pamela both began checking Paige's social media accounts. She was always active online, posting updates, replying to friends, sharing photos. But that day, there was nothing. No updates, no posts, no replies. The silence online only deepened their fear. This wasn't just unusual for her, it was unheard of. Hours went by. Still no word. It became clear that this wasn't just a case of running late or a minor misunderstanding. Her family and friends knew by then that something serious had happened. Pamela contacted law enforcement right away. Given the circumstances and everything they knew about Paige, authorities treated the situation as a high-risk disappearance from the start. Unlike in many teen cases, the idea that she had run away wasn't even considered. The first phase of the search began. Family, friends, salon co-workers, and even neighbors joined efforts, calling everyone they knew, printing flyers, looking for any possible clue. But at this stage, not a single lead came through. Paige had vanished in a matter of minutes. No one could have known that a simple decision to stop by a corner deli would turn out to be life-altering. Meanwhile, law enforcement worked in parallel, conducting interviews. They mapped out Paige's likely path from Lauren's house to the bus stop and tried to determine who might have seen her that morning. Shop owners along the way were questioned, and surveillance footage from nearby businesses was reviewed. Any deviation from her usual route drew attention. A day passed, but there was still no new information. The lack of witnesses, signs, or physical evidence only made the situation more tense. The only solid window investigators had was that brief period when Paige was walking down the street and entered one of the stores. That's when attention began shifting toward the businesses along her path. No one yet suspected that the trail had gone cold behind one of those very doors. The search for Paige Daugherty went on for 2 full days. Her family, volunteers, and the police never gave up hope of finding her alive. But on the morning of March 21st, 2016, that hope was shattered. Her body was discovered by 2 people walking along an overgrown roadside area, about a mile from the bus stop she'd been heading toward that Saturday morning. The location was hard to access, thick brush, rarely traveled. That explained why her body hadn't been found sooner. The 2 passers-by spotted a suspicious-looking black bag on the ground. When they moved closer, they realized there was a body inside. Law enforcement arrived quickly and secured the area. Even during the initial inspection, it was clear the girl had died from multiple knife wounds. Later findings would reveal just how brutal the attack had been. Forensic examiners counted 146 sharp force injuries on Paige's body. 61 of those were direct stab wounds. The rest were consistent with defensive injuries sustained during a struggle. Her arms and forearms showed the heaviest damage, proof that Paige fought back with everything she had. She was barely 5 feet tall, but she fought for her life. Some of the injuries to her head and neck were especially targeted and repetitive. One deep slash to the neck had severed the carotid artery, causing massive bleeding. According to experts, this was the fatal wound. The level of aggression involved in the crime left no doubt. This wasn't a random act or a robbery gone wrong. It was deeply personal and emotionally charged. Investigators quickly ruled out the possibility of a random attacker. The number of wounds, the specific areas targeted, and the sheer force used all pointed to someone who knew Paige. The crime was committed with rage, something often seen in cases driven by personal motives. The location where her body was found also raised red flags. It was hidden from the main road, not visible from traffic, and required effort to reach. This wasn't a last-minute decision. Whoever was responsible either knew the area well or had picked the spot ahead of time to conceal what had happened. The way the body had been wrapped and the way it was placed made it clear that she had been brought there after her death. News about the discovery of Paige's body spread quickly across Clydebank. For everyone involved in the search, It was a devastating shock. The family was notified officially. Her mother, Pamela, struggled to accept the reality. Dylan, Paige's close friend and boyfriend, was in complete disbelief. Volunteers who had posted flyers and shared updates online were now posting messages of grief and sympathy. The entire community sank into collective mourning. Meanwhile, police began analyzing surveillance footage and speaking to anyone who might have seen Paige the day she disappeared. Their goal was to reconstruct her final steps and identify who saw her last. It became clear that this crime had either been planned or carried out by someone who was sure they could erase all traces. But in a town where nearly every corner store and intersection had surveillance, disappearing entirely was almost impossible. The investigation entered a critical phase. Detectives focused on mapping out Paige Doherty's movements on the morning of March 19th. They requested footage from all surveillance cameras along the route she usually took, from her friend Lauren's house to the bus stop. Two locations stood out: the Fleming food store, where she typically grabbed breakfast, and the neighboring deli, Delicious Deli, where she had stopped that morning. The breakthrough came after a call to police from Ashi Ahmed, owner of Fleming food store. He remembered seeing Paige that morning. She waved at him, but didn't come into the store, which struck him as unusual. Remembering that his security system had a wide-angle view, he reviewed the footage. The video clearly showed Paige walking down the street and entering the shop next door, John Letham's Deli. However, the footage did not capture her leaving. Ahmed immediately shared the video with police. Investigators studied the footage closely and found that at 8:21 a.m., Paige walked into Delicious Deli. For more than an hour afterward, no one was seen exiting. Then, at 9:58 a.m., cameras captured John Letham locking up the shop, pulling down the shutters, and leaving in a hurry. He crossed the street to another store where he purchased disinfectant, bleach, and heavy-duty trash bags. This was confirmed by both surveillance footage and the store clerk, who noted how anxious the customer appeared. At 10:03 a.m., the cameras caught John again, returning to the deli with his purchases. Not long after, he emerged carrying a large black bag, which he loaded into his car. The footage clearly showed a foot in a white sock sticking out of the bag. Investigators now realized they were witnessing what looked like an attempt to dispose of a body. But this was only one part of a disturbing sequence of events caught on tape. Instead of driving away, Letham returned to the store multiple times over the next 2 hours. He went in and out repeatedly. During that time, he tried to clean the space, scrub away blood, and get rid of evidence. Cameras captured his movements, facial expressions, and gestures. He appeared frantic and disoriented. At one point, he even changed clothes and casually reopened the deli to serve customers as if nothing had happened. A police unit was dispatched immediately to make the arrest. Within 10 hours of receiving the footage, investigators had enough evidence to take him into custody. Letham was arrested and brought in for questioning. At the same time, forensic experts began an extensive examination of his shop. At first glance, it looked clean, but after moving refrigeration units and display cases, they found traces of blood under the shelves. Tests confirmed that it was Paige Doherty's. Each new piece of evidence further weakened Letham's position. His actions after Paige's disappearance were all captured on camera. He didn't just try to conceal the body. He actively cleaned the crime scene, resumed business operations, and served customers. This showed a deliberate effort to destroy evidence, not a reaction made in the heat of the moment, as he would later claim. Alongside the arrest, investigators continued to gather evidence. They inspected John Letham's car and found traces of blood, despite clear attempts to clean the vehicle thoroughly. Forensics also examined the area where Paige's body had been found and confirmed that Letham's vehicle had been at the location on the day he admitted to disposing of the body. By this point, there was no longer any doubt. Surveillance footage had become the key piece of evidence. It showed who last saw Paige, how the suspect behaved, and the step-by-step effort he made to cover his tracks. Ironically, it wasn't his own cameras, but those from a neighboring store that revealed the truth. After his arrest, John Leatham initially denied everything. He claimed he didn't know Paige Daugherty and insisted she had never entered his store. He also maintained that there was no way blood could be found on the premises, but police already had hard evidence: security footage, blood samples from the floor and his car, and the unmistakable image of a body in a trash bag. Faced with this overwhelming proof, Leatham changed his story and confessed to the crime. In his statement, he claimed it all happened in a panic. According to him, Paige entered the store, placed an order, and asked if he was hiring. He said he asked her age, and when she said 15, he declined. He then alleged that Paige threatened to accuse him of inappropriate behavior if he didn't give her the job. He claimed he panicked, fearing he'd be falsely accused, haunted by his brother's criminal history, and grabbed a knife. Leatham described the moment as a sudden conflict. He claimed Paige started yelling, and he struck her in an attempt to make her stop. When he realized she was no longer alive, he wrapped her body, hid it in a storage area, and went home. There, he hid the body in a shed, changed clothes, and the next day took his family on a weekend trip to Balmaha, as if nothing had happened. 2 days later, he returned and left the body in a brush-covered area by the roadside. Investigators scrutinized his version of events carefully. First, there was no support for the claim of blackmail. Paige had no history of aggression or manipulative behavior. Her mother, friends, and co-workers all described her as kind, gentle, and respectful. She already had a job at a salon she loved. There was no reason for her to be seeking work elsewhere. Forensics also revealed the attack was not a quick outburst. It involved a prolonged struggle and numerous injuries, ruling out the idea of a momentary lapse. There was no evidence of intimate violence or any personal connection between Paige and Leatham. This made his motive even harder to understand. He maintained that he had no intent to harm and acted in response to what he saw as a threat. But the nature of the attack, 146 sharp force injuries, many targeting the neck and face, left no doubt about the level of brutality. Details of the case began to appear in the media. The public reacted with disbelief to Leatham's explanation. One aspect that drew particular outrage was what he did after the crime, taking his family on a trip, supposedly to clear his mind. At the very time when the community was searching desperately for a missing teenager, he was on a weekend getaway, knowing full well that her body was hidden in his shed. In light of the evidence, Leatham was formally charged with the crime. His confession, paired with far-fetched justifications, failed to earn sympathy from either investigators or the public. From the very beginning, it was clear. This was not a momentary lapse, but a deliberate attempt to cover up a serious offense. And although authorities never identified a precise motive behind the act, the scale and brutality of the attack spoke volumes. As soon as John Leatham's name became known to the public, attention quickly turned, not just to him, but to those around him. In particular, people began focusing on his twin brother, George Leatham. George's criminal history became widely known only after the case surrounding Paige. Daugherty's death was revealed. That's when questions began to emerge. How much of John's behavior might have been influenced by family dynamics? During questioning, John himself referenced his brother, saying he panicked because he didn't want to end up like George. He claimed he feared being accused of misconduct and couldn't bear the stigma associated with that. But investigators found no evidence that Paige had made any threats or attempts at manipulation. Even if one were to accept this explanation as sincere, it raised deeper concerns. Why would someone who appeared to live a stable, ordinary life rely on his brother's past to justify his own choices? Psychological profiles of the brothers revealed different levels of self-control, but both showed tendencies to deflect blame and distort reality. The key difference was that John had long maintained the outward appearance of a respectable man, while George had drawn police attention on multiple occasions. The public interest in the Leatham family grew among journalists, bloggers, and residents of Clydebank. People began to examine the brothers' pasts, draw comparisons, and speculate about the roots of the aggression. Some began to suspect that a culture of hidden hostility may have existed within the family, even if it wasn't obvious from the outside. And while the investigation into Paige's death revealed no direct connection between the brothers in that incident, their shared history painted a picture, a backdrop that made John's violent outburst seem less isolated than it might have otherwise appeared. 7 months after the crime, court proceedings against John Latham began. By then, investigators had assembled an overwhelming body of evidence: surveillance footage, forensic results, witness testimony, and the defendant's own confession. His legal team did not dispute that he had taken Paige's life, but argued that it had been a moment of panic without intent. Still, the court had to weigh not only the facts, but also the motives, the behavior that followed, and the way Latham had responded afterward. The trial drew public attention. In the courtroom were Paige's family members, journalists, activists, and everyday residents of Clydebank, all trying to come to terms with what had happened. Pamela, Paige's mother, was the first to speak. She described how their lives had changed since Paige disappeared, how she spent nights without sleep, waking up in terror, thinking she'd heard her daughter's voice. She spoke of the daily emptiness, of a pain that nothing could ease. And perhaps most painfully, she described how difficult it was to see her other kids struggling to understand why their sister never came home. Andy, Paige's stepfather, also addressed the court. He spoke about how the tragedy had broken him from the inside, how he could no longer manage day-to-day life. His testimony was especially emotional when he spoke about their son Andrew, who has developmental challenges. Andrew couldn't understand why the sister he used to walk with and watch cartoons with had suddenly disappeared. According to Andy, the boy kept asking when Paige would come home, and the family was forced to avoid giving him a direct answer. His words left the courtroom visibly shaken. The judge found John Latham guilty of committing a serious crime with intent. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 27 years. For Paige's family, it was seen as a step toward justice. As her mother put it, it wouldn't bring Paige back, but at least it ensured that the person who took her life wouldn't walk free anytime soon. The court emphasized the brutality of the crime and Latham's efforts to conceal it, dismissing any notion that this was an emotional breakdown or moment of panic. Despite the overwhelming evidence and public reaction, Latham's defense team filed an appeal, arguing the sentence was too harsh. Their claim was based on the fact that Latham had no prior criminal record, had a family, a young daughter, and had been regarded as a respected member of the community. They insisted the crime wasn't premeditated, and that Latham had shown remorse. Therefore, he deserved a reduced sentence. This sparked outrage across Clydebank, especially among Paige's family and friends. Nevertheless, the appeals court reviewed the case and reduced the minimum term from 27 to 23 years. The judge cited a lack of evidence for pre-planning and the fact that Latham had confessed. The decision triggered strong backlash from the public. For many, it felt like rewarding a criminal. Paige's relatives said publicly they considered the reduction an insult, not just to them, but to Paige's memory. Latham's actions after the crime, cleaning the scene, hiding the body, trying to resume work as if nothing had happened, showed no real remorse. John Latham himself remained composed during the hearings. He never looked directly at Paige's family or addressed them. His demeanor was flat, emotionless, leaving the impression that he had distanced himself from the reality of what he had done. Observers noted that he didn't show any recognition of the damage he had caused. He never apologized, never expressed sympathy, not to Pamela, not to Andy, not to anyone close to Paige. That only reinforced the feeling that reducing his sentence was a mistake. The final ruling left a bitter aftertaste. On one hand, the offender was behind bars. On the other, knowing that he could be released in just over 2 decades sparked discomfort for many. But the most important outcome was that the crime received a formal legal judgment, and Paige's family had the opportunity to speak publicly and share the pain they had endured. The court answered the question of who, but the question of why remained unanswered. The case impacted everyone who knew Paige. Authorities arranged protection for Letham's wife, Kasia, after she became a target of verbal and physical attacks during prison visits. She was harassed and assaulted until she eventually fled to Poland with her daughter. The Letham family faced public condemnation. John's brother, George, continued to engage in criminal behavior, threatening people with weapons, physically assaulting his wife. The family's darker history began to surface. Pamela, Paige's mother, started a foundation to support families affected by violent loss. She later gave birth to a daughter and named her Penny Paige. The grief never left, but the family tried to keep moving forward. Clydebank has not forgotten Paige. Memorial walks were held in her honor. People wore pink, released balloons into the sky. Her funeral drew a large crowd, with the casket carried in a horse-drawn carriage. On what would have been her birthday, friends threw a party, the one she never got to attend. Paige became more than just a victim. She became a symbol, a memory, and a reminder of the devastating consequences of senseless cruelty. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.